Hello and welcome back. Today I wanted to do a review of the Golden Harvest soundboard. Now, if you're not familiar with Golden Harvest, it's a board that sort of came out of nowhere in the independent installers market and has been gaining in popularity. You're seeing it now in more wide-scale productions like Saberforge's sabers sometimes have a Golden Harvest board. Some of the LGT vendors are now using Golden Harvest boards. So you're seeing it in mass production, but you're also still seeing it in the independent sabersmith market. So I wanted to go over the Golden Harvest board and talk to you guys a little bit about the capabilities of the board, the quality of the board, the ease of use of the board, and how it compares to other boards on the market. So first off, I wanted to mention that the Golden Harvest board is principally at its best when it's used in a NeoPixel setup. You can use it with baselit, but you don't find that in any of the mass market applications really. A lot of what this board offers that's beyond what some of the other boards or what a lot of the basic boards offer is blade styles. So stuff that you're only going to see if you're doing it with a NeoPixel. It does have really good sound mixing, so if you've got it on a baselit application, it still is a nice board, but you're really not getting the most out of it. So the capabilities of this board, it's got smooth swing and accent swings. So what that means is if I'm moving the blade slowly, it's a hum, it's an altered hum rather. If I move the blade fast, there's an accent swing or a more classic swing sound. Okay, in this board, it still sort of suffers from some of the same downfalls of both of those different fonts, or both of those different sound types. If you're doing a spinning routine or some sort of choreography, as long as the blade keeps moving, if it's moving slow, it kind of has that lawnmower effect. If it's moving too fast, the accent swings take over and you get a lot of swooshing. So if you're doing it for choreography, this still is not a motion setup that really sounds good for a flow arts routine. But if you're not really listening to the saber, if you just want to make the lights and the sound and the animation, that's great. If you're just using it for cosplay or even combat or dueling and stuff like that, it's fine. But the sound mixing is actually pretty good. The layers of the sound nice on top of each other. It also features a lot of effects, about as many effects as I've seen in anything else, maybe a little bit more than. It has a blade lockup, it has a tip drag, and it has a melt setting, and those are all basically features of the same thing. A blade lockup is where the blade sort of does a lightning effect or a solid flash throughout. It's when your blades are locked with each other. The tip drag is that dragging the tip across the ground so that it looks kind of like the lightsaber beam is interfering with the ground or burning the ground. The melt is to look like in the prequel trilogy when they were melting through the blast doors. It's that sort of melting metal or a wall with your blade. And those are all basically the same thing, except the lockup is throughout the entire blade and the melt and the tip drag are localized just to the tip. It has blaster deflects and clashes. It has a force effect. So pretty much everything that all the boards on the premium boards on the market are doing right now. Let me go ahead and demo some of those features for you. So I'll go ahead and turn it on. You notice since it's a NeoPixel, it's got the power up and the power down. Interesting thing about this board is the default on this board triggers the speed of that power up and power down to the power up and power down sound file that's part of the sound font that you're using. So that's something I started to see with Electrum Sabercrafts as well. The board manages to make the effect keyed to the audio. So that's actually kind of cool. But I'll show this to you. I've got a solid red blade on it right now, so we'll be able to see some of the effects. Some of it's going to translate to the camera, some of it isn't, but I'll try my best to describe it. Here we have the power up. All right, I have this on a solid red blade right now. Here's the smooth swing. Accent swing. Okay, let's do a blaster. Clash. All right, here's a force effect. All right, and lockup is a little bit tricky to trigger with a one-button setup. I'll talk about that a little bit later, but let me see if I can do it here. There we go. So sort of a lightning flash that moves around in the blade. Okay, melt. Okay, the melt on this, the blade is red, the tip is white. Depending on the angle that I put it at, the tip will change from yellow to white-yellow gradient. So it's got sort of a movable melt to it, and that's something that I haven't seen before this board. I'm sure you can do it with a Proffie, but I hadn't seen it as a preset before. Okay, tip drag. A lot less variety than melt, but much the same thing, except just with white. All right, let me see. What else do we have? I did force, I did tip drag, blade lock up. Okay, that's pretty much all of it. So let me go ahead and power this down, and you'll notice the scroll down effect. Oh wait, there we go. There we go. All right, so those are pretty much a lot of the features that you would expect in a premium board. They're handled pretty well in this. The sound mixing, as I might have mentioned, is pretty good in this as well. In terms of while the board is off features and sort of menu options, while the board is off, I can hold down the button and rotate between sound fonts.
Sound menu.
All right, I do that by rotating the saber.
Cyber Terror, Dark Ages, Hatred, Idol. The Champion, the Dark Lord Revis, the Learner. The Second, the Teacher.
Balance.
Sideboard.
Daddy issues, complete.
Cryocarbon.
Son of Darkness.
All right, so let me go ahead and start with that one.
You're hard to get rid of.
Oh, okay, I switched it unfortunately. There we go. So I'll just go with that one, which is a Rey Skywalker, I think. I can change the volume. Now, it took me a while to figure this out because the guide that I found online, or the manual for this, had a different instructions for triggering volume. So I think that's either inconsistent or at least inconsistent to this build, but.
Volume control activated.
All right, so the volume, actually, this is something I hadn't seen before, which is kind of cool. The volume indicator is the extent to which the blade is lit. So there's high volume, lower volume, or low volume to mute.
Volume adjusted.
All right, so here it is on high volume. All right, so we've got a volume control. We also have a battery level.
Checking power level.
There it is.
70% left.
Okay.
Nothing's impossible.
So it tells you how much battery you have left on it. So again, all of these things are handled well, but they're pretty much features that you're used to seeing in standard NeoPixel setups, like a lot of Proffie setups or the CFX. So let me show you what's specific to this board. The customization onboard options are actually kind of cool. So let me walk you through those. We can adjust the color of the blade. Now that's a pretty standard feature. They've got a spectrum sort of thing where you can cycle through it by turning, or you can rotate it gyroscopically. But the thing that really sets this one apart, I think, is the way that you customize the animations. All right, this thing divides animations into two layers, a top animation and a bottom animation. Now that doesn't mean the bottom of the blade and the top of the blade. That means the base animation and the accent animation. So the base animation or the bottom animation is going to be basically what the blade is doing, whether it's rotating through colors, whether it's a flame blade, that sort of thing. The top animation is what I'm going to show you first because it's easier to see on a solid blade. But the top animation adds like flickers or unstable or rain effects, that sort of stuff. So you can take a flame blade and you can add a rain effect to it. And that's something that I haven't seen in other boards before. So that's kind of cool. It's a little bit difficult to navigate though, and it's also kind of difficult to see what it is that you're doing, especially if you've got a complicated bottom animation. You can't really see the top animations because they're too subtle. Like if I had a flame blade on this, I wouldn't necessarily see the rain too much or be able to tell what it was doing. So I'll show you the top layers first, and then we'll look at the bottom layers. Actually, first let me show you the color cycle.
Choose color profile.
All right, I'll stop on a blue because I think that's going to be easier to see on the camera. All right, so
Choose blade effects.
okay, so to get to the base effect on this setup, or the bottom effect, I would rotate.
Wave 1. Classic 1.
Okay, I'm going to leave it on classic and show you the top animations. Okay, there we have sort of a Cylon / Knight Rider blip going back and forth. Now we got 2 of them, 3 of them, slower big one. Now we've got power, or sort of a shooting up through the blade, faster, flicker, sort of an unstable flicker. I'll stop trying to name these. You can kind of see them in the screen. That's a subtle rain there. Got some more classic rain blade. There's some waves. I think I'm back to the beginning here. All right, so I'll leave it with a flicker. Now let's show you some of the, actually go to something a little bit more subtle. There we go. So let me go ahead and cycle through some of the bottom animations.
Classic 2. Classic 3. Classic 4. Classic 5. Classic 6. Frozen 1. Frozen 2. Frozen 3. Frozen 4. Frozen 5.
All right, so the classic and the frozens are kind of subtle effects. The classic ones are some of the stuff that you're used to, like the waves or the flicker or the pulse. The frozen effects sort of isolate bits and wiggle things around them. I know that's a bad description.
Frozen 6. Frozen 2. Wave 1.
Here's a wave.
Wave 2. Wave 3. Wave 4. Wave 5. Wave 6. Wave 7.
And we're going to wave 6. There you go. You can really see that wave.
Wave 7. Wave 8. Wave 9. Flow 1.
Okay, so the flow is the red, green, blue rainbow cycle.
Flow 2. Flow 1. Flow 1. Flame 1.
Here's a flame blade. There's, I think, 6 of these.
Flame 3. Flame 4. Flame 5. Flame 1. Flame 1.
Here's like a Sauron blade.
Gradient 1. Gradient 2. Wave 1. Classic 1.
Okay, so that was a long demo, but you guys get the idea. The base layer is waves, flickers, pulses, flames, gradients, rainbow. The top layer is unstable effects, rain effects, sort of bursts or static effects, that sort of thing. So being able to give you the opportunity to layer both of those, that's something that the Asteria board also does, but with the Asteria board you have to drag the files on and it's all set. With this one, there's an onboard menu that lets you cycle through it. All right, so in terms of ease of use, I will say that the customization on this gives you a lot of things that you're able to do. And it's a whole lot easier to customize the board and to set up your presets than it is with something like a Proffie, which is insanely difficult to edit. It is not as easy as a CFX. It has more capability, but it's not as user-friendly. So in terms of setting up your blade styles, you can program in custom blade styles. It's harder than it is with a CFX, but you can do more with it. It's easier than it is with a Proffie, but you can't do as much. So it's somewhere right in the middle between those two. In terms of the onboard menu, there are different button setups that you can set up with this thing. There's there's 2 different 1-button setups, 2 different 2-button setups, and then there's a momentary and latching switch setup, which is kind of an odd one as well. If you're going to get a Saber with this board on it, I highly recommend doing one of the 2-button setups. Get a Saber with 2 buttons. This one has a 1-button setup, and the 1-button setup is really difficult to navigate. Once you get the hang of it, you can do it. But there's a difference between a short push and a long push, and there's no feedback exactly that tells you which one of those you've accomplished. So a lot of boards have like a flash as you hold the long push. This one doesn't. So there's a long push and a short push and a twist. And the twist is sometimes, and a stab. So the twist sometimes reads as a stab. The stab sometimes reads as a twist. The long sometimes reads as short, and vice versa. So you can end up in the wrong place with your trying to navigate this on the 1-button setups. If you're using a 2-button setup, it's a whole lot easier because the guidelines and the instructions are much more straightforward, and it's a lot harder to trigger things accidentally. So in terms of easy use, it's right between a CFX and a Proffie board in terms of customization and onboard menu. The onboard menu, if you've got 2 buttons, isn't bad. The onboard menu, if you've got 1 button, is not anything that I would recommend. Get a 2-button setup. All right, so this has been a look at the Golden Harvest board. I think these things, like I said, they're gaining in popularity. You're going to see them more and more. So hopefully this gives you some idea as to whether or not this is the board for you when you're picking an installation. All right, hopefully this has been of use to you. If it has, join me back for more. I'll see you next time.